Imagine it is still dark outside, the kind of darkness that makes the world feel hushed and half asleep. The roosters in the village have not yet crowed, the streets are silent, and only a faint line of gray lies on the horizon where dawn is about to break. In the corner of the village, however, one small building is already alive. From its chimney rises a thin column of smoke, and from inside comes the deep, steady sound of a bellows feeding fire. This is the forge, the blacksmith's workshop, and its day begins earlier than most. Step inside, and the first thing you notice is the heat. Even before the sun rises, the blacksmith's fire roars as though it has a life of its own. The air is thick with the smell of burning charcoal, iron dust, and sweat. The walls are blackened from years of smoke, and every surface seems covered with a thin layer of ash. In the middle of it all stands the blacksmith, a broad-shouldered man with soot already clinging to his skin. His hair is damp, not from rain but from the heat of the fire that never truly goes out. His tools are simple but essential. Hanging from wooden racks are hammers of different sizes, their handles smooth from years of use. Heavy iron tongs lie nearby, ready to grip the glowing metal. On a block of wood sits the anvil, its surface scarred with marks from countless blows. In one corner rests the great bellows, the lungs of the forge, wheezing as they feed air into the flames. Together, these tools will turn lifeless chunks of iron into the things that keep an entire village alive. A blacksmith's work might look magical to the outsider. The glow of the fire, the shower of sparks, the ringing of metal, it is all strangely mesmerizing. Children in the village sometimes stand at the doorway, wide-eyed, watching as iron bends under the hammer as though it were clay. To them, the blacksmith seems almost like a wizard, commanding fire and metal with nothing more than his strength and skill. And in truth, many villagers whispered the same. Some believed the blacksmith had a touch of magic, that no ordinary man could tame iron in this way. But the blacksmith himself would laugh at the thought of magic. To him, it was not spells or secrets, but endless hours of labor, sweat, and aching muscles. Every strike of the hammer was work, plain and simple, repeated again and again until the metal gave way. There was no shortcut. To be a blacksmith was to live in the heat, to live with noise, and to accept that your body would always ache. His day begins with the fire. Before any shaping or hammering can be done, the forge must be brought to life. He crouches by the hearth, stoking the embers from the night before, adding fresh charcoal, and working the bellows until the flames leap high. The glow spreads across the workshop, pushing back the shadows. Soon, the first bar of iron is laid in the fire. Slowly, it changes from black to red, then to a blazing orange, until it is soft enough to be shaped. The blacksmith grips it with his tongs, places it on the anvil, and the hammering begins. Clang, clang, clang. The sound is steady, almost rhythmic, echoing across the village like a drumbeat. This is the sound that wakes the farmers from their beds, the sound that tells the village another day has begun. It is both a comfort and a reminder, as long as the blacksmith works, life can go on. What does he make? Almost everything. The blacksmith is the quiet heartbeat of the community. He forges the nails that hold wooden houses together, the hinges on doors, the locks on chests, and the tools farmers use to till the soil. He makes the knives that slice bread, the hooks for fishing, and the horseshoes that keep animals working. And, when lords or soldiers demand it, he makes weapons, swords, spearheads, and armor. Without the blacksmith, the village would struggle to survive. And yet, despite his importance, the blacksmith is rarely treated like a hero. He is respected, yes, but not admired. People nod politely when they pass him in the street, but few would invite him to feast at their table. His life is considered too dirty, too grim. His clothes are always singed with sparks, his hands rough with calluses, and his hair smells of smoke. To some, he even seems frightening. After all, who else works so closely with fire? Who else bends iron with their hands? Whispers follow him. Some villagers believe he is touched by forces not entirely human. Others say his skill must come from bargains with strange spirits. The truth is far less mysterious, but such stories cling to him like the soot on his skin. In a world where most people never step inside a forge, the blacksmith's work will always seem half hidden, half magical. And still, the blacksmith works on. He does not have time for stories or whispers. Each day is full, each order pressing. The farmer needs a new plow before planting season. The miller needs an axe repaired before the next tree falls. The knight who rides through demands a sharper sword. And all of it begins here, in the glow of the forge, with a man who wakes before dawn, feeds his fire, and swings his hammer until his arms ache. So the sparks fly, the fire roars, and the steady ringing continues. In the dark heart of the village, before the world has fully woken, the blacksmith is already at work, shaping not just iron, but the rhythm of medieval life itself. The forge was not a place of comfort. Step too close, and the heat alone could drive you back. Stand inside all day, and you would know why blacksmiths carried scars across their arms and shoulders. The fire was their greatest tool but also their greatest danger. Each morning, the blacksmith began with hope that his hands would steady, his hammer would strike true, and no accidents would come. But accidents were as common as the sparks that flew from the anvil. A stray spark could land on his skin and leave a blister. A slip of the hammer could crush a finger. A piece of metal, still glowing orange, could fall and burn straight through his shoes. And there were no hospitals or safety gear in the medieval village, no gloves, no goggles, no protective clothing. Only leather aprons and calloused skin stood between the blacksmith and injury. The blacksmith's body bore the cost of his trade. His palms were rough with hardened blisters. His arms ached from the endless rhythm of hammering. His back bent from hours leaning over the anvil. Smoke filled his lungs day after day, and his hearing dimmed from the constant ringing of iron on iron. By the time a blacksmith reached old age, if he was lucky enough to live that long, his body was often worn out, his health long spent in service to the forge. And yet, there was no pause in his work. The village could not wait. Farmers needed tools before the planting season. Shepherds needed iron shears before the sheep were ready for shearing. Hunters needed arrowheads before the next trip into the woods. And lords always demanded weapons, armor, and nails for their castles. The work followed the seasons. In spring, the blacksmith was busiest making plowshares, hoes, and axes for farmers preparing their fields. In summer, he repaired broken tools and forged new ones. In autumn, he sharpened scythes for the harvest. And in winter, when the cold froze the earth, he often turned to crafting smaller items, locks, hinges, knives, and nails. War, of course, could come in any season, and when it did, soldiers filled his workshop with urgent requests. The forge was never silent. The clanging of metal echoed through the village streets from dawn until dusk, and sometimes deep into the night. For the villagers, this sound was both ordinary and reassuring. It was the rhythm of survival. If the blacksmith was working, life could continue. But for the blacksmith himself, the sound was relentless. Each strike of the hammer rang in his ears, echoing long after he set the tool down. Some blacksmiths said they could hear the ringing even as they lay in bed, the phantom rhythm following them into their dreams. It was as though the forge lived inside them, never letting go. Money was another burden. Despite his importance, the blacksmith was rarely wealthy. Coins were scarce in most medieval villages. Payment often came in the form of barter, a sack of grain for new horseshoes, a few chickens for a repaired plow, a jug of ale for a sharpened blade. Some villagers even tried to pay with promises: "I'll bring you half the harvest next month," or "You'll have meat when the pig is slaughtered." The blacksmith accepted what he could, but his family often lived on the edge of poverty, their meals as uncertain as their neighbors'. Still, his work gave him a certain standing. No one could ignore the blacksmith. The farmer might grumble, but he needed his tools. The knight might sneer, but he needed his sword. The Lord himself, sitting in his stone hall, relied on the blacksmiths. Nails and hinges to hold his castle together. In this way, the blacksmith was both invisible and essential, rarely celebrated, but always required. The forge also drew people together. Children watched wide-eyed as sparks leapt into the air, their faces glowing in the firelight. Women brought broken pots or bent tools, waiting patiently as the blacksmith hammered them back into shape. Men gathered to trade news while the blacksmith worked, the rhythm of hammering filling the pauses in conversation. In a village with little entertainment, the forge was a place of constant motion, always alive. Yet behind the steady flow of work lay exhaustion. The blacksmith's life was a cycle of rising before dawn, laboring in smoke and heat, and returning home with sore muscles and a weary mind. There were no holidays in his trade, no time when the forge could rest. Even when sickness came, or when storms raged outside, the fire still had to burn. For a blacksmith, life was duty first, comfort last. And despite this toil, there was pride. Every strike of the hammer shaped more than metal, it shaped the future of the village. The plow he forged could mean a full harvest. The horseshoes he made could mean faster travel. The locks he built could mean safety for a family's treasures. His work, though exhausting, mattered. But perhaps what kept him going most was something quieter, something unseen. It was the knowledge that while others feared hunger, war, or the loss of tools, he could face those challenges with fire and iron in his hands. His skill gave him a kind of independence, a strength that few in the village could claim. He was never rich, but he was never useless. And in the Middle Ages, that was a kind of power. So the forge roared, the hammer struck, and the sparks flew. Day after day, year after year, the blacksmith worked on, caught between exhaustion and pride, hardship and necessity. His life was not easy, but it was steady. And in the harsh reality of the forge, there was a rhythm, a purpose, and a strange kind of dignity that kept him standing by the fire, even when his body begged him to rest. When we think of the blacksmith, it is easy to picture him only at his anvil, hammer in hand, sparks flying, fire roaring. Yet his story reached far beyond the walls of his smoky workshop. In truth, the life of a medieval blacksmith was connected to the very fabric of society. Every corner of the village, every field, every castle wall carried the quiet imprint of his labor. The forge was not just a workshop, it was a link in a much larger chain. Iron did not appear by magic at the blacksmith's door. It had to be mined from the earth, hauled across rough roads, and traded from distant regions. Charcoal, too, had to be produced, often by woodcutters in the forests who burned timber slowly in great pits until it transformed into fuel. These supplies tied the blacksmith to networks of merchants, miners, and traders. His work was local, but the resources that fed his fire came from far away. In this way, the blacksmith stood at the center of invisible trade routes that stretched across kingdoms. His craft also carried him into every layer of society. To the farmer, he was the maker of plows and hoes, the silent partner in every harvest. To the shepherd, he provided shears and small knives. To the carpenter, he gave nails, hinges, and locks. To the knight, he was the one who shaped swords, spears, and armor. Even kings and lords, with all their wealth, relied on the blacksmith's work. No castle gate could swing open without iron hinges. No army could march without weapons. The blacksmith was the hidden strength beneath their grandeur. And yet, for all this importance, he remained in the background. Few chroniclers wrote about blacksmiths. Few songs were sung in their honor. Their names are mostly lost to history. But in their silence, they held a power greater than recognition. They made the tools that shaped the world. Beyond the practical, blacksmiths also held a place in the imagination. Fire and metal were forces of awe in the Middle Ages, and the blacksmith stood closest to both. Villagers sometimes whispered that he had a special bond with the underworld, or that his forge was a place where spirits lingered. Stories spread of blacksmiths forging enchanted swords that could never break, or chains strong enough to bind even mythical creatures. In folktales across Europe, the blacksmith often appears as a figure of both danger and wisdom, sometimes a trickster, sometimes a protector, but always someone touched by mystery. Even religion could not escape the image of the forge. In Christian symbolism, the blacksmith's fire was sometimes compared to the trials of the soul, where suffering shaped people as the hammer shaped iron. In Norse mythology, dwarves were said to be master smiths who crafted legendary weapons for the gods themselves. And in village gossip, a blacksmith's unusual strength or skill might be explained by secret pacts or blessings from beyond. These legends, while exaggerated, show something important: the blacksmith's work stirred wonder. To watch raw, lifeless iron glow and bend into shape was to witness transformation, and transformation always feels like a kind of magic. But what of the blacksmith himself, standing in the midst of these stories? For him, the forge was not legend but reality. The fire burned his skin, the hammer bruised his muscles, and the work wore down his body. Yet at the same time, he must have felt the quiet pride of knowing his craft would outlast him. The tools he made would be used long after his arms grew too weak to lift a hammer. The swords he shaped might pass from father to son, carrying his workmanship into battles he would never see. Even the humble nails he forged would remain in wooden beams long after his name was forgotten. In this way, the blacksmith's legacy was not written in books but in iron. He left his mark not through words but through the strength of his hands. And though most blacksmiths never traveled far, their work traveled endlessly, carried by farmers to the fields, by traders along the roads, by soldiers across borders. Their iron held villages together, moved armies forward, and gave structure to everyday life. Imagine, now, the village at night. The forge fire has died down, glowing only faintly. The blacksmith sits at the doorway, his muscles heavy with exhaustion. Children have long gone to bed, farmers rest from their fields, and even the Lord's castle lies quiet. Yet the tools he made that day are already at work. A new plow waits for tomorrow's soil. A repaired axe leans against a tree, ready for the next swing. A sharpened blade rests by a knight's side. The blacksmith has no song sung in his name, but his presence fills the silence of the village all the same. Over time, blacksmithing would change. New methods, new machines, and new technologies would eventually replace the small village forge. But in the Middle Ages, there was no replacement. The blacksmith was as essential as the baker, the miller, or the farmer. Without him, doors would not open, crops would not grow, and battles could not be fought. Today, when we picture the medieval world, we cannot help but imagine the sound of hammer on iron, echoing through cobbled streets. The blacksmith has become a symbol, not of glory or wealth, but of resilience, labor, and survival. He reminds us that history is not only made by kings and generals but also by ordinary hands shaping ordinary things. So the next time you hear the sharp ring of metal in a film or story, pause for a moment. Behind that sound lies centuries of real men, standing in hot, smoky workshops, striking iron again and again until it yielded. Their lives were not easy, and they were rarely celebrated, but they were the ones who built the bones of the medieval world. And perhaps, as you drift to sleep, you might imagine that steady rhythm, the hammer rising, falling, striking, like a heartbeat in the dark. Not the heartbeat of one man, but the heartbeat of an entire village, kept alive by fire, iron, and the quiet strength of the blacksmith.